evening and welcome to Unfiltered. My name is Ridi Klabi. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, tonight's introduction is unusually long, and that's precisely because tonight's topic is very, very close to my heart. It is complicated, it has so many layers, and there are so many voices, a plurality of voices from whom we want to hear. So bear with me. I identify as a feminist broadcaster and author precisely because every single day confirms that women and children continue to just get the raw end of the stick from the corporate space to their own homes. Women continue to face restrictions to their freedoms and hardly get rewards for their labor. Take the latest report by market research firm Ipsos, which found that on average, women in South Africa earn 27% less than their male counterparts. This wage gap can be found even across the first world. Countries in Europe, for example, according to the World Bank, women earn 19% less than men on average. And this gender pay gap has persisted over many, many years. It is not just the gender pay gap that remains burdensome, but also access to education. Listen to this. UNESCO estimates that 130 million girls between the age of 6 and 17 are out of school. And 15 million girls of primary school age, half of them in our part of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, will never, ever enter a classroom. Think about that. We then come to violence. The ever-present threat of physical and sexual violence hangs like an albatross around our necks. The rate of sexual violence in our country, South Africa, is among the highest in the world. Yet, the conviction rate for sexual offences is disappointingly, but not surprisingly, low. The horror of femicide, where a woman is killed by her current or ex-partner, continues to dominate news headlines. The statistics here are just as chilling. A recent report by Africa Check revealed that the global rate for femicide was 2.4% per 100,000 women. Let me say that again, 2.4 per 100,000 women. South Africa's rate for the same period, fasten your seatbelt, was 9.6 per 100,000. This is the reality for women here. So what does all this have to do with the chaos we saw in Parliament last week, where MPs exchanged blows in a show of brawn over brain? What does this have to do with a senior cabinet member, a minister, Malusi Gigaba, displaying his pinky finger at another male MP in what was no doubt a competition over who has the biggest? It was a phallic competition, I think, an expression of male superiority, machismo, and conquest. It is not unheard of for men to boast about how many women they have been with. It is not unheard of for men, even on public platforms like social media, Twitter, for example, to suggest that a difficult, quarrelsome, argumentative woman needs a man's private organ to fix her. So, when a man, especially a cabinet minister, mocks another man about the size of his manhood, he too is demonstrating a belief system, a culture that locates power and authority along gender terms. It is, as far as I'm concerned, quintessentially an expression of male power. Power which I contend is responsible for the poor status of and treatment of women all over the world. So, how do we unlearn sexist thoughts, jokes, and practices? Can we birth a new masculinity that is not steeped in competition, aggression, and toxic power? Tonight, on Unfiltered, we ask, are men South Africa's gender problem? Let's first watch this.
From the 100-men march to the total shutdown, A call was made for urgent intervention against gender-based violence in the country. According to Statistics South Africa, over 70,000 women experienced sexual offences in 2016-2017, while recent police crime stats revealed that 291 more women were killed in the past year. In response, government often calls on civil society to join hands with authorities to curb the scourge.
Men need to be included into the conversation and find out really what is the problem with men, what is the problem with South African men in particular, because as Themba said, my colleague, that it is likely for a woman to die at the hands of men in South Africa.
It starts with us as youth. If we can break this chain that our brothers and forefathers have started, then it will be better for the females to be safe.
We have to break that chain of abuse against women and children, because they are the future of this country. We always preach on giving women the opportunity to lead. Where are they going to get the opportunity to lead if we are suppressing them?
It can't be business as usual. Government alone can't stop violence against women. Bontate, Abobaba, it can't be business as usual. No is no. And let's focus, Hahulu, let's focus on the boy child. The violence we see, the boy child is crying out. Ori, the boy child says, I want to be counted, not in my name.
So joining me to unpack this, Anomboni Segaza, who's the young professor at UCT, and she's a researcher in gender and cultural studies. We also have Professor Simpiwe Sesanti, who's associate professor at UNISA's Institute for African Renaissance Studies. And we also have Griselda Grootboom, who's an author and survivor of trafficking. Welcome, all three of you. Thanks indeed.
Thank you very much.
So I've just given like a 10-minute rant. It feels as if I've done the script before, I've played this role before, and I keep saying the same things over and over again, and it doesn't end. I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm tired. Do you get tired of this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But we have to continue this conversation. And it wasn't a rant, by the way. Don't minimize your voice. You said what needs to be said. And yes, many of us feel tired. It feels as if, you know, it's 2 steps forward and 50 steps backwards. But that's just the nature of society that we're in. And it's the only way that we can do to change the patriarchal nature of the society. And we have to keep at it.
What are the problems in society? How would you define them as far as this topic is concerned?
Well,
violent masculinities.
Yeah.
What is that in the first place?
Well, firstly, your question today was, are men the problem
Yes.
of society? I think that to the extent that men embody patriarchal ways of doing things, to the extent that they perform violent masculinity, to the extent that they believe that their manhood can be fulfilled by them dominating other people, women, and anybody that they consider weak, including other men.
Other men.
So yes, they are a problem, to the extent that they do not question the way in which, the multiple ways in which they continually perform ways that perform their own identities in ways that undermine other people, oppress other people, or simply disregard the dignity of other people. Yes, they are a problem.
Okay, so Nomboni, so have we lost our sense of humor here? The Minister of Home Affairs went like this in Parliament, in that house where laws are enacted, in that house where our well-being is supposed to be decided upon. So maybe we are humorless. Maybe we are just a bunch of angry women who need to get an injection of humor. What was wrong with this?
Well, people on Twitter actually suggested that I'd lost humor. I think it was incredibly disturbing to see a minister doing that in Parliament. Firstly, there's a way in which the space in the National Assembly is increasingly becoming very patriarchal in terms of how power is performed, in terms of how people handle disagreement, in terms of how people engage with each other. What Gigaba did in Parliament was to use a phallic symbol, which is widely associated with aggression, with male aggression, with violence if need be. And what he did was, yes, Ndlozi was taunting
him, but
had
he
used what
talked
had
about,
happened.
yeah?
in terms of his video clip and all that. And yes, was taunting him, was mocking him.
But he was addressing the president as well and talking about a cell phone. But anyway,
and as it happens amongst parliamentarians. So what he did, and earlier you used a very, very important phrase, brawn over brains. So what he did was to simply resort to the assertion of power and aggression. He abandoned reason.
I mean, Cruzella, I follow you on Twitter, and you've been addressing this thing. What offended you about this?
You know, we're dealing with just the language in our court cases right now with Omatosa and the behavior
the pastor
and
of
character of male species in that space. Because alone Omatosa's members are church members, and when they sit there and a victim testify, you hear the grounding from men. And what the minister did is, for me as a survivor, it's automatically rape culture behavior character that comes from African men. That it wasn't a surprise act when it comes to discuss and tell a South African man, you're wrong. And for me, I get that all the time when I have to stand at ShopRite and there's a guy behind me and I have to correct him that, can there be space? Because this line is quite long and I'm really feeling your body touching mine. And then the guy will automatically come again, and with his aggressiveness, like you said, he defends with his and that aggressiveness is a man ego muscle. So I think the minister knows what rape culture, body language is, as feminists, that we've been doing it. And I had to bring Me Too in my tweet when I saw that. I was like, how dare this guy don't see the wrongdoing of his actions still influence rape culture acts that we're trying to, because we're trying to say hashtag rape culture, the culture in rape, the influence that causes rape in our community. There's a culture behind it, and this culture is dominated by men from everywhere, and I think he knows that.
Professor Simpio, let me bring you in here. So I'm a journalist, I'm an anchor of the show, but I'm a woman living in South Africa. And my biggest frustration as a woman is that the way we define violence is so superficial that if I leave you bleeding without your limb, then that's violence. But the absence of the physical signs of violence are not violence. We have not, I think, in our conversations, married our thoughts, our words to the actual deeds. I wonder what your thoughts are around the way we speak about violent masculinities.
Thank you very much. Let's begin by saying, you know, violence is not just physical. Violence is emotional. Violence is psychological. And that, in fact, it is easier to deal, and I'm not saying easy, but it is easier to deal with the physical violence than with the psychological and emotional, because you can get a doctor that can heal your scar or your wound, but it takes more than that to deal with the emotional and the psychological. So let me quickly go back to the point that you were making earlier on. You spoke about Gigaba's manhood, and precisely, you know, how do we define manhood? I think sometimes with the language of English, if I were to speak to a person, whether that person is woman or man, in my language, I would say umtu, right? But in English, there is somebody and there is someone. Now, when someone begins to address you as somebody, consciously or otherwise, that person looks at you as a physical body. But in African culture, from an African cultural perspective, there is more than that. When you speak about a person, you're speaking about a being, which goes beyond. So if we then say that manhood is reduced to a penis, then we begin to seriously misunderstand, because where I come from, manhood is not about maleness. There's a distinction between the two. One can be a male, but one is not necessarily a man. Manhood is about values, and where I come from, you are taught that as a man, you are responsible as a human being to ensure that those that you live with, you know, coexist as human beings.
Isn't that a human identity, that as a human being living amongst fellow human beings, you ought to espouse those values? Isn't that the problem, though, that we kind of impose these sacred values on men, that they're expected to behave in a particular way, and automatically, inevitably, there are some who will misunderstand that and believe that they come with some sort of sacrosanct power into the space?
No. Where we come from, there is always a negotiation about the meaning of concepts. They are argued, they are contested, they are engaged with. And so, but at the same time, there is a particular understanding that is enriched. So here we are. We have a man and we have a woman, right? And you've got to understand again here, you know, there was someone who was making a very important point. What is meant by motherhood? Some would confuse motherhood with being female, and it is not. Where I come from, as a man, I can be, and in fact, I should be a mother, a male mother to the children of my sister, umalume.
But that's a...
May I?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we'll have to finish the point and then start the debate, yeah?
Yes. And so, therefore, that being the case, you know, there are no fixed and rigid kind of understanding. There's got to be a nuance that is advanced in that kind
so
of a
you can
discussion.
occupy both spaces
Absolutely,
and both identities.
Well, that's basically in terms of a particular cultural milieu, where, for example, a child would be considered, like I consider my uncle, which is the male mother, Umalum, as somebody that I can go in and burden myself on issues of, you know, that bother me. But irrespective of that, even that is very eroded right now by particular forms of masculinity, the kind of ways in which people inhabit their being. So you find, so even those kind of spaces where uncles, maternal uncles, can be tender and supportive of their nieces and all
that's
of that.
That's not what is being practiced.
That's not what is being practiced. What we are seeing is this reduction of the male subject into the phallic symbol, into the penis, basically. Let's put it that way. And so what you saw in Parliament is something that we see every day in our society. You saw an expression of phallic militarism, of phallic aggression. So as the one MP raises things that make another MP uncomfortable, he resorts to violence, and then he says, I'm better than you, because as you saw in the video clip. So, I mean, the other way that we can look at it as well is that here is a space that is called Parliament, the National Assembly, where we would like young boys to look and see a different expression of manhood.
Just hold that thought. I want you to complete it, because if we aspire towards a certain ideal, is what we're seeing in society right now a manifestation of that? And are these distinctions helpful? We'll carry on with our conversation in just a moment. Stay with us.
SABC is independent and impartial, and it's important that as we deliver the news, we do so without fear, without favour, without prejudice, and that we ensure that we get the multiplicity of views so that our stories and coverage is balanced.
We pride ourselves on being impartial as well as independent. On the agenda, we basically break down the stories of the day, give it more substance and give it more detail. So all in all, we basically take the news agenda of the day forward.
But more than that, we'll be able to reflect the stories of ordinary folk, people who are trying to make ends meet, facing the most incredibly difficult obstacles and circumstances, and that they will find that their realities are expressed on the SABC.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud, and I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
Fashion, travel, music, food, and food. Did I mention food? We at Trends Travel love bringing you cuisines from around the world.
Forbes US have declared Gaborone the coolest city destination to visit in the world for 2018-2019.
You know, as designers, we're always setting trends and also doing like high fashion. So it was quite nice to come and see the ready-to-wears every day.
Welcome back and thank you for joining us. Our guests tonight are Nomboniso Gasa, who's the adjunct professor at UCT, a researcher in gender and cultural studies. We have Professor Simphiwe Sesanti, associate professor at UNISA's Institute for African Renaissance Studies. We also have Griselda Grootboom. She's an author, she's a gender activist, and she's a survivor of sexual violence, specifically trafficking. And today we are trying to define violent masculinity and, of course, using what took place in Parliament last week as a case study where for many of us it was a blatant and crude display of male power as one cabinet minister basically boasted and mocked the other about his size. But that's not the only thing that happened in Parliament. It would be wrong to, to just use only that incident to justify our conversation. I think the time has been long coming. We saw disagreements just degenerating into a physical confrontation. But, Nomboniso, let me take Professor Simphiwe's side here for a moment. Is he not saying that what we're defining as masculinity is not how it was meant to be? It's not how it should be. And should we not aspire to that ideal?
Oh, yeah, sure. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I think we all agree that the kind of violent masculinity that we see is not ideal. It's not what you would like your son who's watching Parliament to take away from the conversation. But I think we can really fully address what we should do when we also look at what is happening. If you look at some of these conversations, especially in social media, but everywhere, when you raise these things, people say, oh, but what's wrong with you?
Or do you have a husband? You need a husband to fix
all these
you.
kinds of things.
Yeah, those kind of things.
Some young men started saying this thing to me on Twitter.
You haven't had it for a long time.
It's very hilarious.
Where's your husband?
Where is your husband?
You're so busy being cheeky on social media.
And one of the interesting things was you also had the mayor of Ekhuruleni, Mr. Masina, Mzwandile Masina, coming in on that day in relation to the tweets that I'd said, but really taking the side of Gigaba. And I don't think he realized that this is a problem. People do not realize the problem. And he says, why do you enter? This is not where do you enter. This is not your business. And this is the thing. And even Malusi Gigaba, you have a minister who has completely demonstrated inability to be self-aware. Inability to fully understand his actions.
No, but my thing is, when the clip came out, the first thing that boosted him as a man, his ego. That guy was on Twitter the whole night feeling the ego that women are thinking he's got a big size. And it was the most saddest reaction after coming from a summit. As
you were there.
You
were one of the people who addressed the president. How did you feel after that?
72 hours after that summit, the next minute we see a minister that comes from a governess and putting fingers of size.
Okay, Professor Simphiwe, we've got an idea from what you said about how it ought to be, but that's not how it is. In your words, or do you think, is there a crisis of masculinity in society? And if there is, what is it? What is the crisis facing being a man?
There's absolutely no doubt that there is definitely a crisis. And that there's absolutely no doubt that our society, is ruled by patriarchy. And we've got to define what we mean by this, because sometimes, certain words do not convey the exact meaning. And here we're referring to a situation where men have a sense of entitlement. And they think that, they can rule the world, they can have anything and everything that they want, anywhere and anyhow.
True.
But having done that, it is important for us to begin to examine and interrogate, the factors and the environment that contributes to that kind of a thinking. And I was watching, the summit, and I had Minister Susan Shabangu together with the minister, the Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete. And both of them identified the question of culture and the question of religion. And I think that it is very important for us to seriously interrogate that. Sister Nomo was saying earlier on that, what Simphiwe you are advancing is not what it is. And she's absolutely correct. And so, therefore, the question that we must begin to raise is, what was? how did we get to this point?
Because
and
we
how
can't
do we move
return
forward?
to where we were. But
You know?
certainly we can have conversations about what is decent and what isn't, what is abusive to women and children and what isn't. And also what is abusive to men as well, because that's what patriarchy do. It exercises this violence not just on women and children, but men towards men as well, whom they deem weaker than themselves. So it's not a contest between...
One of the things that we should not... I mean, one of the things that is very telling on that day in Parliament, a physical fight broke out amongst opposition parties, right? So this is a space which clearly has been defined as a very, very toxic, aggressive space, right? In one of the incidents, a woman apparently was involved in a fracas, and then this man who stepped in because a woman was being beaten, right?
But is that how women want to be defended in the first place? So anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
There's this one thing that is happening. There's a man who is basically whipping his penis, quite frankly, because that's what Gigaba did. Metaphorically, he whipped his penis and said, mine is larger than yours, right? So there's that. There are opposition parties actually involved in a fist fight. There is ANC on the other hand singing things are going to turn. Don't cry. Right? So this whole environment is an environment that justifies abuse of each other, of the nation that is watching this. Then there's Minister Zulu as well, right? Who joins in this and affirms Malusi Gigaba's size and say, you Ndlozi, with her finger, with her pinky.
But some people have used that to mean that there's no gender issue here. Even a female minister has done that.
Well, this is the thing. So now, Lindo Zulu is an interesting person.
Okay, there she is, a senior minister.
She's an interesting...
So what's so gender unequal about this?
It doesn't surprise that she is the one who does this, because Lindiwe has consistently used the language of patriarchy in Parliament and the language of violence to settle scores.
Like, let's take it outside.
Let's take it outside. I will, you know,
Are you saying women can be patriarchal?
Of course, women can be patriarchal.
Women in Parliament are very patriarchal.
Women can be patriarchal. Women can be phallic. They can endorse the power that comes from the phallus.
Have you experienced that?
I've experienced it as a survivor, going around on political platforms, especially being helped by UN, and sit in these spaces with these women. And automatically you as a woman, and you know, the movement Total Shutdown, we got that, and we told ourselves that in that summit we will not be controlled because we are here to interact. And we got women and minister women telling us constantly to shh. Okay. And that just tells us already that our voices today as women that has been abused in the past 10 or 15 years under black government and its language of how they introduce laws on this issue that we are calling out to, it's totally a no-no, and women are in the front line of gatekeepers for that.
Okay, we're going to, when we come back, we're going to be joined by Thandi Memela, who's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Women in the Presidency, and I want you to start thinking about the questions that you want to address with her. But Professor, very quickly, you talked about culture and religion as themes that came out at the Gender Summit. What about what other people call social exclusion? Do you think that men are socially excluded? Just very quickly, I'll give you a chance to expand on that in a moment.
I don't know what it means by men being socially excluded. You know, men are very privileged in many ways. And I say this as a man, you know.
We had to say that because often we hear about absent fathers as though women are not suffering from absent fathers. And then when we had that culture of Jack rolling in the township, there were conversations around the death of authority in the community. And I thought, but we're feeling it too. Why are you taking it out on us? What are men angry about in South Africa? And I think what is also important is, can we unlearn all of this? Absolutely. Can we unlearn? Can we go on a journey together? We're going to explore that when we come back. When we come back, we'll be joined by Thandi Memela. Do stay with us.
This is a space for every woman in South Africa.
I want to speak to the women who cannot walk a kilometer in this country without looking over their shoulders, without being groped or harassed.
I was not born like this. In 2011, I got stabbed by a boyfriend.
How many centimeters? How many centimeters long is the political will to end the scourge of violence against women against children.
I was locked up in the room for 2 weeks.
There are measures, there are laws, there are policies. But these policies and measures and laws do not speak to these lived realities.
We must fight the culture of gender-based violence.
This is where young men must be taught that women are not their footballs. This is where young men must be taught to respect women.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud. And I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
Good evening, I'm Shante Yankees. Let's have a look at your top stories this evening. Well, 2 suspects are set to appear in court tomorrow in connection with the murder of 7 family members in Vlakfontein 2 weeks ago. 3 women and 4 children were killed. Mozambican national Coupe will now apply for bail. Zimbabwe national Ernest Mabaso abandoned his bail bid last Monday. Over 80 world leaders gathered in Paris today to commemorate the centenary of the end of the First World War. French President Emmanuel Macron invited them to the Paris Peace Forum, a conference gathered of global governance where South Africa is being represented by Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan is set to testify at the State Capture Commission this week. In a leaked affidavit, Gordhan says he met the Guptas at government functions and at a cricket match. He was introduced to one of the Guptas by former President of South Africa, Jacob Zuma. The EFF has already called on the Public Protector to investigate the Minister of Public Enterprises. A pioneering project to clear alien vegetation has uncovered rich tracts of critically endangered plants in the Western Cape. The project is spearheaded by the wine estate in Somerset West. It is believed to be the largest of its kind in the country after restoring over 2,000 hectares of natural vegetation. Of course, those are your top stories this evening. The conversation on Unfiltered with Reddy Tlabi continues.
Thank you so much, Shante, and welcome back to Unfiltered. And of course, you can be a part of this conversation. I forgot to tell you about that, but I bet that you're already doing it on Twitter using hashtag SABC News Unfiltered. Let me remind you once again of our conversation, our topic tonight. We're talking about violent masculinities. And my one interest in tonight's topic is, can we unlearn some of the thoughts, some of the practices, some of the behavior that give rise to violent masculinity? What is violent masculinity? And remember, we asked you earlier, are men in South Africa a problem? Are men in South Africa a problem when it comes to gender issues? Let me remind you of my guests this evening. I've got Nomboniso Gasa, who's a young professor, and she's also a researcher in gender and cultural studies. I've got Griselda Grootboom, who's a survivor of trafficking, an activist and a feminist, really, who's out on the street amplifying her voice in this area. We also have Professor Simpiwe Sisanti, and of course he is Associate Professor, Institute for African Renaissance Studies. And right now on Unfiltered, we go to our Cape Town studios where we are joined by Thandi Memela. Who is Thandi Memela? Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Women in the Presidency. Good evening to you. Welcome, Ms. Memela. Welcome to Unfiltered. Can you hear us?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. So I guess my first question to you, are you as Parliament, are you as a representative of political power and authority, are you satisfied with the progress we are making in creating a safer and less hostile society for South African women and children?
I will personally say that we have to stand together with men themselves to actually try and eradicate the scourge. What is happening right now, a lot of men are still really engrossed in this patriarchy. And we are saying we have to do away with it. We have to stand together and build our future, especially for the kids. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Simpio, let me bring you in here. We have to stand together. We have to tackle patriarchy together. It feels to me that the more we say that this is destroying our society, we need to do away with violent masculinity and patriarchy, that it's not making the difference that it should. Are there some other factors in society that you feel should be addressed? And if we address them, they will contribute to winning this battle. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, to begin with, I think earlier on I spoke about, the interrogation of the interpretation and the understandings of particular religions and particular cultures. So we know that, in the whole wide world, there is an interpretation from a particular religious base that on top there is God and that God is male, followed by his son, who is also obviously male.
Who had 12 male friends. Didn't
Exactly.
like girls very
You mean in the
much.
Christian religion?
Absolutely, yes.
Be specific.
I'm very polite.
No, but the religion
in that particular religion.
So having said, therefore, here is a man who believes that he is made in the image of God and God being above us all. And so males are taught that they are superior to females because, they are created in the image of God. It doesn't end there. It tells you that we are in the mess that we are in today in the world because of women, because it is women who introduced the sin into the world.
According to the Christian, yeah?
According to that interpretation. And that, in fact, this beautiful practice and process of bringing life into the world is a punishment from that kind of a God. And so when women, give birth through pain, it is as a result of punishment. Then you have this man who tells you that we've got to understand that there is God on top, then there is Jesus Christ, then there are men
Then it sounds
and women are
insurmountable
right.
because we can't rewrite all of that. So right now, in modern day life, how do we teach a different
what
type of
What it
masculinity?
means is that we've got to directly confront that kind of a theology and begin to expose the falsity that it advances. Because for as long as things are attributed, to a superior God who approves and loves men and who punishes women, men will always feel entitled because this is what God has
But
said.
that's what we're trying to change with the patriarchy law and constitution in courtrooms. When we are saying if there is a man that just automatically just verbal violence. I've traveled around the world, and some countries, when you just approach a woman with a body language, face expression, that woman can go to the police station and open a case, and immediately that person will be locked up. And that is the first step that needs to be taken in our country so that justice is...
It sounds as if you're saying there are simple things that
There
we
are
can do
simple
right
things.
now. Nomboniso, you're shifting in your chair. What's going on there?
Oh, no. I think I hear you. But I think what is important also is to acknowledge the fact that every day in our lives, every day in our communities, we contest the notion, the notion of a superior God and the notion of men as the ordained, right? In fact, in Christian religion, there are a lot of women, feminist scholars of theology, in fact, who contest that. So it's important for us to also think about that. But I want to bring this conversation back to what happened in Parliament, because I do want to say something to Memela.
Please do, go ahead.
I think that, firstly, I think it's important that Parliament says something about what happened.
You wanted to write a letter to Parliament.
Yes,
Are
I
you
still
going
do.
to?
Yes.
Why?
Because actually that's a desecration of a public space. That's a performance of violent masculinity. And also, I think it's important that we demystify this notion of bravery as necessarily meaning aggression. So you look at someone like Lindiwe Zulu, for example, who has a very, very illustrious history in MK. But the way in which she performs that is in fact very, very violent, and it's exactly what
Let
we
me bring in
to do
Mtandi
away with.
Memela.
So,
do you accept?
So what is the role? That would be my first question. What will be the role of the committee that she chairs in ensuring that politicians who were involved in this behavior
Let's give her a chance
are
to
held
answer.
accountable, and also it doesn't happen, where it becomes part of the ethics of Parliament that you cannot engage in this kind of behavior.
Mamela, what do you have to say about that? I mean, you talked about walking on this journey together, tackling patriarchy together, but when patriarchy and aggression and violent masculinity are playing themselves out in that very house where our laws are being made, then there is a problem. So what are you going to do about it in that particular space?
It's up to us as women, actually, to fight that. One thing that the men must know, there's no progress without a woman. We are left on our own when they decide to go on a spree. We bring up our children on our own. We're not really dependent on that. And every woman must start, even today, for those who have always been dependent, to try and get rid of that dependency.
But I'm talking about Parliament, because you're talking as though you don't have the political authority
to care for their families.
Okay, you're breathing heavily. What's going on?
I want to know, what is her plan? What is the strategy? What is the program? Because when we walked out the summit, there was a clear message from the president saying, by next year, February and January, our proposals will be on the table and the women presidency will be. So as her, as in Parliament, what are they doing?
Okay, don't make this thing broad. We agree, I certainly agree with you about the process of transforming society. Part of that is taking action when something happens. I'm saying, in the position that you hold, here is what has happened. A minister has whipped his penis,
and others have exchanged blows.
And
so
others
what is
have exchanged blows.
Okay.
So I'm wanting to know, what is the committee going to do about it?
All right, let's give you a chance to think through, and then when we come back from the ad break, and of course, Professor Simpio, if you've got a question as well, do think about it and ask it after this break. Stay with us.
Fashion, travel, music, food, and food. Did I mention food?
We at Trends Travel love bringing you cuisines from around the world.
Forbes US have declared Gabon the coolest city destination to visit in the world for 2018-2019.
You know, as designers, we're always setting trends and also doing like high fashion. So it was quite nice to come and see the ready-to-wears every day.
So TB continues to be the top infectious killer worldwide, claiming 4,500 lives a day. It is estimated that approximately 1% of the global population is autistic. So if you're on a medical aid, how well do you understand the benefit structure and how your medical aid generally works? And if you're not on a medical aid, have you considered belonging to one? So how much and what should you know about this condition? Is it curable? Can people living with epilepsy, for instance, play sport, drive cars, get employed? 7 million people around the world die annually as a result of tobacco use.
For Health Tip, catch Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
And welcome back. You are still watching Unfiltered, and we are talking about violent masculinities, what we need to unlearn as society. And I said society, men and women. The journey going forward, given that we know the numbers, we know the statistics, we know the extent of sexual violence. And we many of us believe that it is not just the act of violence itself, but the thoughts, how we perceive each other and what we say about each other. And what happened in Parliament last week embodies all of that. It is the perfect case study for challenging violent masculinity. Let me remind you who's with us this evening. We've got Nomboniso Gasa, who's a researcher in gender and cultural issues. We have Griselda Grootboom. She's an author, a gender activist, a survivor of trafficking. In fact, her book is called exit. And of course, from our Cape Town studios, we have Thandi Memela, who's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Women in the Presidency, Professor Simphiwe Sisanti, Associate Professor at UNISA's Institute for African Renaissance Studies, is still with us. I think we need to give Mam Thandi a chance to respond. That everything that you're saying about the state and the condition of women, the absence of men, the women bearing the brunt of all sorts of social ills, there isn't a single person here who would disagree with you, but everybody wants to know, given that you've got the political authority, you've got the position, you've got the foot in, what are you going to do and what are you doing?
We'll continue educating our people, and we've got a very simple constitution. Anybody can actually read and understand what is tabled there. But at the same time, in our constituencies, we also discuss these things, because it's no more just in the township, a family being exposed to this, but it's happening all over. Right now, we are faced with a scourge of the so-called pastors abusing our little girls.
Okay, let me simplify this. We've just spent the last half hour or so talking about Parliament in particular, that more often than not, we are seeing a demonstration of brawn over brain. We saw Parliament degenerating to demonstrate exactly what we are trying to unpack this evening. So maybe let's leave the societal issues for just a second and just talk about Parliament. Do you think that Parliament is a scene for violent masculinities? Is that what you experience? Do you think some of your MPs and ministers need to learn some of the things that you are in this very constitution that you are quoting tonight?
I can't hear her now.
Okay, she can't hear me. Maybe you want to take that up.
You know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, we're speaking about Parliament, and the first time I had to go and do a presentation with Embrace Dignity with a petition against prostitution, and I walked in knowing half of my clientele were the government officials.
You could recognize them?
Yeah, and they could recognize me. So when we talk about masculinity in Parliament, I don't want to sugarcoat it. I don't want to be nice about it, because it's the most irritating platform in South Africa, Parliament, for me as a survivor.
There are memories
because
that are bad.
When I was trafficked, my clientele through all the years from the age of 18 was them. And you know, when I approached the tweets and putting Me Too and all the other global organizations that I work with and saying, there's a minister in our country that we fight. We're literally fighting in schools right now so boys don't do porn movies. And here's a minister in our country. He feels his masculinity, his right as a leader, with all the rules that comes with being a minister, that his porn movie has a right to his sexual right, without knowing what sexual exploitation has been doing in our country, without knowing the influence of abuse and violence coming from men. And you know, even this thing of we saying gender-based violence, we're supposed to be saying the violence are coming from men to women. Okay. And the problem for me to say, yes, Parliament is this, Parliament is that, and I walk in it and thinking, these were clients to me.
You know them.
So why are we busy trying to be nice to them when they know their culture behind the doors that we don't see? And now today, we see what they do.
There's a lot of anger, there's impure. There's a personal journey here. There are many women and children who can identify with this story. I know you've got something to add. I'd like you to have the freedom to add it. But I do want to get to the forward looking. Can we unlearn this? Is there a different way of doing things, notwithstanding the historical and cultural background that you gave us earlier?
Okay, then I will respond to that. Yeah. Okay, let me respond to what you're saying.
No, say what you wanted to say,
okay.
Freedom.
I wanted to say earlier on that I definitely identify, and the point that is being raised by Cressida is very important, because when we've got to understand what constitutes Parliament. We've got to understand that Parliament is constituted by politicians from many various parties, but from a particular ruling party, right, that has, resisted from its inception, to begin with, membership of women. Let us begin it there. that it was decided that women, were not entitled to being members of the ANC when the ANC was formed, and only in 1943. And even then, thereafter, let's come then here to the present. In the present, after 1994, we see that the position that has been only once, you've had, you had Tandi Bundise as the Assistant General Secretary, and then you had...
Tenjuem Tincho?
No.
You mean if they say... Oh, okay.
So the position of Assistant Secretary General seems to be a position that is meant for women. You have one stage, the chairperson of the ANC being, for 2 years. Thereafter, it is reversed. So you see that there's always a tendency that women would make one step, progress, but there'll be two
Isn't that
come
more
back
about representation rather? Because you can have 80% women, but if we agree that patriarchy and how it's practiced, so the culture can still exist, so it's not just about the numbers.
The point that I'm trying to make is that those kinds of actions are informed by a particular attitude.
Okay, quickly.
No, but there's a counter narrative to that. I'm sorry. And I don't want to deal with that because actually that linear explanation of the ANC's liberation movement and women joining in 1943, yes, it is that, but there's a whole range of other stuff that happened. So we can park it for now. My point is, and I think we all agree here, that there is something that is so everyday about what happened in Parliament. That's why people say, what happened to your sense of humor? There's a way in which this form of violence, this way of talking to each other, this way of performing aggressive masculinity and toxic masculinity in Parliament, it's something that we can all identify with, right? So we need to start with that. We need to understand that the language of fallism puts the penis and the male power in the center of everything.
But isn't it enough that survivors come with the language to unlearn that?
But
how long must we deal with the men in South Africa as survivors coming through and saying to you, as a survivor, this is what male culture in South Africa is doing?
Okay. That is precisely what I'm saying we should say.
Yeah.
We agree. That is, I'm saying, for example, look at President Zuma and Umshiniwan. Look at after Kwetu Carnival, when the SADF was beaten, look at how the Katusha rocket, which goes, was called Stalin's organ, okay? Because and seen as performing a particular kind of... So it's this symbolism, it's these things that we talk about every day, that we need to be able to say to people, listen, exactly what we're doing now, that what Malusi did and what Lindiwe did is not normal.
And the example you use, standing too close to me, dominance.
So what I'm saying is we need a level of self-awareness, right? We need, and again, I will go back to Malusi. When he apologizes, right, and he says, but you must understand, I have been mocked, I've been taunted. And that is also the language of the abuser. She made me do this.
Okay.
So there's no self-mastery. There's no other way of thinking. I could settle this conversation.
Okay, when we come back, I think we've reconnected with Tandi Memela. We're going to hear from her. And I want us to spend some time talking about the ordinary things that people do that are violent. For example, two guys who are strangers to each other arrive at a traffic light and they just start taunting each other and competing to see who's got the fastest car. Is that just an example of violent masculinity?
Or she's standing in the queue and saying to somebody, please don't get too close.
Let's take a short break.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud, and I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
This is a space for every woman in South Africa.
I want to speak to the women who cannot walk a kilometer in this country without looking over their shoulders, without being groped or harassed.
I was not born like this. In 2011, I got stabbed by a boyfriend.
How many centimeters? How many centimeters long is the political will to end the scourge of violence against women, against children?
I was locked up in the room for 2 weeks.
There are measures, there are laws, there are policies. But these policies and measures and laws do not speak to these lived realities.
We must fight the culture
of gender-based violence.
This is where young men must be taught that women are not their footballs. This is where young men must be taught to respect women.
Welcome back. This is the last segment of the program and things are getting heated. There's a lot to talk about. We are still hoping to hear from Thandi Memela, who's in Parliament and we understand can't hear us. But just very quickly, I just want to get back to the ordinary. We can theorize and get all academic and all of that, but there are certain things that happen in our society every day. Someone standing so close to you. There may be men who are watching us tonight and are saying, what's this fuss about? What are they talking about? Well, we're talking about things like don't cry like a little girl, buying little boys toys like guns and swords and all of that. What else? I'm thinking hip hop and kwaito and that all aggressive language.
Why are you so obsessed with Zuma?
That whole thing that when you're debating with a man,
how is this going to help you? What's the point of you going to a rally that where women?
Is it uncultural, Prof? Is it uncultural for women to challenge men?
Certainly not. In where I come from, where I come from, you know, where women were encouraged to challenge men.
So we mustn't just shut up and be good.
No. There's no such.
But that's what I want to know.
But
that's what I want to know. The minister that comes from military, were they not taught to fight, or was it just an exiled MK level?
No, it goes back to what I'm saying. There's a lack of self-mastery. This assumption that because I disagree with you, there's only one way to settle it. And
take it outside. Mamela, can you hear us now?
That's not what she was trying to do, actually. It's
Mamela in Cape Town, can you hear us?
Without being thoughtful, without
Let's see if
thinking
Mamela can hear us. Thandi, can you hear us? Okay, she can't hear us. There's no point just going around in circles. You are smart. Can she hear us? Are we lucky? Mamela, can you hear us? The question that we asked earlier about violent masculinity and the patriarchy playing itself out in Parliament, do you accept that and do you have solutions to that problem? Okay, we're wasting precious time.
Yes, it happened.
Right?
But as it is right now, the matter is in the hands of the committee that deals with such things in Parliament.
All right, there's your answer. The matter is in the hands
Integrity grouping is going to be dealing with such things. We don't condone violence.
So that should make you sleep at night. I mean,
let me quickly go every day, as you were saying, and Nogos was saying. Yeah. You see, I come from a Xhosa speaking group. There in the bush, you are told that Jongap, when you live here, kufanele uyoqaba ifutha lakho kwintombazana ongazotshata nayo. Right? Go and rub off your fat, your dirt on a woman that you are not going to marry. So defile that woman.
And that has got nothing to do.
That has got nothing to do with our culture. Second point, ilobola is meant as a tribute to womanhood. But no, this African man comes around and says,
I've bought you.
You've bought you. You become a property. That's an absolute distortion. The last point, you have a chief whip in Parliament, and he comes around and says, what kind of a Xhosa girl are you?
Oh, wow. We remember all of that. We're running out of time, but very quickly, your last comment, but also what you'd like to see people like Thandi Memela do with the power they have in position.
The integrity part of his case the only thing? So there's no sexual
there's no gender
there's
issue,
nothing. So this committee was just developed for the integrity of his life, or what political side, or for the ruling party? Because then I would say, can the integrity start with Jacob Zuma also? Okay. And let's all go all the way back.
Nomoniso, last words for me.
Well, I think that I think this is a conversation that has to continue. I think that we need to take back our parliament, actually, by saying whenever there are expressions of violence like we have seen, or anything else that we disagree, we ought to be able to say, we are not going to accept this expression of childish behavior.
Yeah. Childish but violent, that's the irony.
In our parliament, and actually name it as such. Yeah. And I think that's what we've started doing here, and certainly follow up with Parliament and make sure that those objections are heard and they're heard for what they are.
We're going to leave it there. Thandi Memela, Parliament, Simpiwe Sesanti, Griselda Grootboom, and Noboniso Gasa. I suspect that we're going to be back here after another incident because they happen too often. And also just going on a journey with each other, as Mam Memela has said, it feels to me that we're long off from that because we're trying to dumb down the conversation and play dumb, actually, I think. We see the violent expression of male power in many areas of our lives. I started off by giving you the gender pay gap, talking about women's representation in important, influential roles. It is in the thoughts, the language, the practices that we see that women are disempowered. Thank you so much for watching our program. Keep talking, keep reflecting, and you can continue with the conversation on our social media pages using hashtag SABC News Unfiltered. Good night and thank you.